The diner was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped itself around you like a blanket, uneven and threadbare but comforting in its familiarity. Outside, rain fell in gentle sheets, smearing the neon pink and blue of the "Open 24 hours" sign across the wet pavement. Puddles reflected the lights in fragmented, dancing patterns, like someone had taken shards of glass and scattered them across the street. Inside, the hum of the old jukebox was the only soundtrack besides the occasional clink of dishes from the far end where the waitress moved slowly, almost like she was in a trance, carrying plates and coffee with careful precision. The smell of coffee, frying bacon, and something faintly sweet, perhaps syrup, mingled in the air. It was the smell of late nights, of people who had nowhere else to be, or who had no choice but to be there. Eli sat in his usual booth near the window, a seat that had become as much a part of him as his own hands. His coffee had gone cold some time ago, a dark pool of bitterness in a chipped ceramic mug. He didn't care. The warmth wasn't what mattered. He came for the quiet, the consistency, the way the world seemed to pause in a diner like this. His hands rested on the table, calloused and strong, the kind of hands that had worked hard, carried weight, and endured more than anyone could see. He stared out the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass, following invisible paths, merging and separating. There was something meditative in their movement, something that made him feel like he wasn't alone, even when he was. The bell over the door jingled softly, a sound so familiar it barely registered. Yet, something about the rhythm of it today caught his attention. He glanced up and saw her. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, standing there with wet hair clinging to her cheeks, a backpack slung over one shoulder, looking like she had been caught between places and didn't know where to go next. She scanned the diner with wide eyes, hesitant, unsure. Every table was empty except for his. She paused, then walked toward his booth, boots splashing quietly in the puddles near the entrance. "Can I sit here?" she asked, her voice soft, hesitant, almost like she was afraid the words would shatter if spoken too loudly. There was a tremor to them, a vulnerability that made him want to look away, not because he didn't care, but because it reminded him of something he had long tried to bury. She wasn't asking permission, she was seeking permission. And in that, there was a quiet desperation he recognized. Eli's eyes met hers, steady and measured. There was something in her gaze, raw and honest, a flicker of defiance that hadn't yet been extinguished by disappointment or hardship. He nodded slowly toward the seat across from him. "Sure," he said. Then, after a pause, as if it were some sort of unspoken rule, he added, "Only if you eat too." Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. "I don't have," she began, fidgeting with the zipper on her backpack as if it might contain all the answers. He lifted a hand, cutting her off gently. "Didn't ask if you could pay. I said eat." His tone wasn't harsh, it carried a quiet authority, a sense of decency that didn't need to be explained. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering something rarer than money, permission to exist, permission to be seen. She blinked at him, unsure if he was joking or serious. Then, with a hesitant grace, she slid into the booth, placing her backpack at her feet and letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The waitress approached without a word, already familiar with the routine, pancakes for her, black coffee for him. The order was placed with no exchange of cash, no awkwardness, just the simple act of acknowledgement. As she ate, her hands wrapped around the plate, careful, almost reverent, he watched quietly. Every so often, she glanced at him, curious but cautious, as if trying to read him like an open book. "You come here often?" she asked through a mouthful of pancake, her words muffled but genuine. Eli's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Every night," he said. "Some folks have church. I've got this place." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed fragile but bright, breaking through the monotony of the diner's hum. "Strange church," she said, teasing gently. "Not so strange," he replied. "You sit, you listen, you remember the people who ain't sitting with you anymore." Her laughter faded, replaced by a quiet nod. "Yeah," she murmured. "I get that." Her voice carried a weight beyond her years, a subtle acknowledgement of loss and survival. Time moved differently in the diner. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, streaks of water glinting in the neon light like liquid crystals. The jukebox shifted to another slow, wistful song, filling the silence with notes that were half melancholy, half comfort. She finished her pancakes, wiping syrup from her fingers, then looked up at him, really looked, as though trying to understand who he was beyond the worn jacket and the scars on his hands. "Why'd you let me sit here?" she asked finally, the question hanging in the air, tentative and raw. Eli stared into his coffee, swirling the dark liquid, letting the reflections of the neon sign ripple across its surface. "You looked like you needed someone to say yes," he said after a long pause. There was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet recognition, the kind of understanding that comes from years of seeing people at their lowest and knowing they deserve the smallest kindnesses. She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. The diner around them seemed to shrink, the world outside reduced to nothing but rain and neon, and the hum of the jukebox threading the silence between them. There was no need for further explanation. The simple act of being allowed to sit, to eat, to exist without question, was enough. The waitress returned with a refill of his coffee, placing the cup down with a soft clink. He murmured a thanks, and she moved on, leaving them in their shared quiet. The young woman finished her coffee with a careful slowness, savoring the warmth as if it were more than just a drink, but a symbol of belonging, of connection. Eli watched her with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, one that hinted at memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. The diner, the rain, the soft glow of neon, the slow music, all of it combined into a fragile cocoon of comfort. For the first time in what felt like a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. As she stood to leave, she hesitated, glancing at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "I'll see you?" she asked, voice soft, almost uncertain. Eli nodded. "Yeah," he said simply. "See you." She smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to carry a promise, however small, that the world wasn't entirely cold. The door swung open, the bell jingled, and she stepped out into the rain, leaving behind a quiet warmth that lingered in the booth and in Eli's chest. He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the bitterness settle like old memories, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to believe that even in small places, in fleeting moments, kindness could survive. The rain continued outside, relentless and soothing, and Eli waited, knowing that tomorrow, maybe, she would come back. And if she did, there would be pancakes waiting, coffee waiting, and a place beside him in a world that often forgot to offer anyone that simple grace. The diner smelled different that morning, though it was the same diner. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and pale, the mist curling along the streets like soft smoke. Neon lights reflected in the puddles on the asphalt outside, muted now by daylight, and the hum of the old jukebox seemed quieter, more deliberate, as if it knew the moment demanded attention. Eli sat in his usual booth, black coffee in hand, the steam rising and curling lazily toward the ceiling. He had come early, earlier than usual, because he felt it in his bones, today would be different. The bell above the door jingled softly, and he looked up without surprise. She was there, Nora, the girl from the previous night. Her hair was damp but neatly combed now, and she wore a jacket that was too big for her, sleeves rolled up at the cuffs. There was a small, genuine smile on her face, the kind that carried both relief and tentative hope. Eli's eyes softened, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "You came back," he said, a statement more than a question. "You said only if I eat," she replied, smirking faintly, sliding into the booth across from him. "I figured I shouldn't break the rule." Eli chuckled quietly. It was a rare sound, low and gruff, but it carried warmth. "Good. You keep rules. Rules are important." The waitress arrived almost immediately, sensing the rhythm between them. She didn't need to ask what they wanted, she already knew. 2 coffees, 2 plates of whatever special the diner offered today. But she lingered just long enough to give them a small, knowing smile before moving on. Nora picked up her fork, paused, and looked around. "It's different in the daylight," she said softly. "Less scary." Eli tilted his head slightly. "Daylight shows things. Night hides them. Sometimes hiding's good. Sometimes, you need to see." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the world was quiet, the mist curling along rooftops and street lamps, softening edges, making the city look fragile, like it might shatter if someone breathed too hard. Inside, the diner seemed suspended in time, a cocoon of warmth and quiet. "So, why do you always come here?" she asked eventually, picking at her food with delicate care. Her voice was curious but careful, testing, as if she weren't sure she wanted the answer to be heavy with history. Eli stirred his coffee slowly, letting the spoon trace lazy circles along the surface. Used to have a family, he said finally, voice low but steady. Wife, boy, they're gone. His eyes didn't meet hers yet, they stared into the cup as if the answers were hidden there. I'm sorry, she whispered, almost reverently. Don't be. His voice softened. They're gone. Nothing to change that. You sit, you eat, you remember them quietly. That's enough. Nora nodded, digesting more than just her breakfast. There was a silence that stretched comfortably between them, a silence that held understanding without needing explanation. The kind of silence that built trust in moments too short to be anything else. I slept in a bus station last night, she said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. And before that, a cheap motel. Everyone looks past me, or right through me. Except you. You didn't. Eli said nothing, merely nodded, letting her words settle into the space between them. It wasn't pity he offered, nor was it judgment, it was acknowledgement, a recognition that her existence mattered. That simple gesture, in a world that often didn't notice, was a rare treasure. She looked down at her hands, which were small and pale against the diner's worn table. Why do you help me? She asked finally, the question tentative, like testing if the world was safe enough to answer honestly. Eli sipped his coffee, the bitterness filling his mouth, grounding him in the moment. He set the cup down with a soft clink. Because once, someone said the same thing to me. Can I sit here? I said no that time. Never got the chance to make it right. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the low hum of the jukebox, but each word carried weight, a lifetime of regret and the rare opportunity to undo a wrong. Nora absorbed his words, letting them sink in. For the first time, she felt seen, not for what she was doing, not for what she had, but for who she was. Something inside her, long battered by a world that treated her like she didn't matter, softened. She had been looking for permission to exist somewhere, and here it was, offered without condition. Eli gestured toward the window. See the mist out there? Makes the world look like it's waiting for something. You can't hurry it, you just have to be. She watched the gray and silver swirls outside and nodded. I think I understand, she said quietly. Being here, it's different. The waitress returned, refilling their coffees and sliding a small slice of pie onto their table, placing it between them like a gift. Neither Eli nor Nora said anything, they simply shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of the small kindness. Eating together, in that quiet space, became something more than sustenance. It became ritual. It became connection. I never had anyone just let me be, she admitted, her voice softer than before. Always someone telling me what to do, where to go, how to survive. You just let me sit. Just eat. That's all it takes sometimes, Eli said simply, shrugging. Not much. Just seeing someone, letting them be. You don't need a lot in this world. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the first flicker of trust she had felt in months, maybe years. The hum of the jukebox shifted again, a slow, tender song that wrapped around them like a quiet promise. Outside, the rain began anew, soft and rhythmic, washing the streets, blurring the edges of the city, giving them a moment suspended from time. When they finished, Nora reached instinctively for the check, but Eli waved her hand away. Not this one, he said. Next time, maybe. Next time, she echoed, a smile tugging at her lips. Deal. They lingered in the booth, letting the world outside continue without them for a while. Eli stared out the window, seeing the reflection of the neon sign in the mist, distorted and beautiful. Nora watched him, understanding that the man before her was not just offering a meal or a seat, but something more, something rare, acknowledgement, patience, and the quiet dignity of someone who had learned how to care in small, meaningful ways. When they finally stood to leave, the bell above the door jingled, and the morning mist greeted them. They stepped out together, side by side, boots splashing softly in shallow puddles. Rain droplets clung to hair and jackets, but neither seemed to mind. They walked in silence, comfortable, carrying the warmth of the diner with them into a world that often seemed too cold to hold such simple kindness. Eli's hand brushed against Nora's lightly, almost by accident, but it wasn't unwelcome. It was a subtle connection, a promise without words, a quiet reassurance that she was not alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if only for a little while. See you tomorrow, she asked, half teasing, half hopeful. Tomorrow, he said, and this time his smile reached his eyes, faint and weathered but genuine. The world outside remained silver and wet, but inside, there was warmth. Not just from coffee, not just from pancakes or pie, but from the recognition of each other's presence, the simple act of being noticed and allowed to exist. And for that, both of them knew, it was enough. The mist clung to their coats as they walked down the street, each step echoing faintly against the cobblestones, carrying them forward, together, into a day that had begun with rain but promised something new. A chance to be seen, a chance to be heard, a chance to belong.